Welcome in, everyone. Today we're diving into Two Wings, balancing feminine and masculine power in life and organizations. This book had me thinking, what if combining those so-called feminine and masculine leadership traits is the secret sauce for next level effectiveness?
Oh, it goes way beyond just, feel-good leadership. The authors dig deep into how those traditional models, the ones leaning hard on the masculine stuff, might actually be holding us back.
I'm intrigued already. Charles and Monica, the authors, start with a powerful metaphor, humanity as a bird. Where are they going with that?
Well, they quote Abdu'l-Baha. He said humanity needs both men and women, both wings, equally developed to truly soar. That's the foundation of their whole argument. Traditional leadership, so often all about decisiveness and control. It's like a bird trying to fly with just one wing. We miss out on empathy and collaboration.
So we're leaving some serious potential on the table by neglecting those qualities we label feminine. But what's cool is the authors aren't just talking the talk, they've lived this. What brought them to write this book together?
Their backgrounds are surprisingly different. Charles, he grew up surrounded by strong feminine influences. Entering that cutthroat corporate world was a huge shock. Decisiveness everywhere, but very little, emotional intelligence. He saw firsthand how missing those pieces led to straight-up dysfunction and burnout.
It's like they were missing half the equation. And Monica, spending 25 years in those male-dominated industries, she probably saw a similar pattern.
Absolutely. Talented women hitting glass ceilings left and right, not because they lacked skills. The system itself just didn't value their strengths. All those rigid structures, they stifled intuition, empathy, and holistic thinking. The things we need to lead in today's world.
So both Charles and Monica had these aha moments, realizing something was off with traditional leadership. How did they end up teaming up?
Like it often does, fate intervened. They met at a Soul.com gathering in Italy. People there are already open to those deeper conversations about purpose and leadership. They connected instantly, shared this vision for a more balanced, human-centered way of leading.
I love those stories, but they didn't just talk, they put those ideas to work right.
You got it. Co-facilitated leadership training for this huge global company right in the middle of a merger. Talk about high stakes, needing both strength and empathy. They saw how integrating both masculine and feminine qualities, smoother transitions, better communication, a more successful merger in the end.
Okay, that's powerful, seeing the impact. But it makes me wonder, if it's so beneficial, why haven't we seen a wider shift away from those old school leadership models?
Well, think back those early corporate structures, heavily influenced by the military. Hierarchy and top-down control. Think generals giving orders. Those were the leadership traits everyone wanted, those masculine qualities.
Makes sense for the battlefield, but today it feels like command and control is causing more problems than it solves.
Exactly. And those rigid structures, they're slow to adapt, even when there's a mountain of evidence that we need a new approach.
And it's not about being nice. The book actually has some hard data backing up this integrated approach.
Well, yeah. They cite this Harvard Business Review study, companies with diverse leadership, meaning both gender and thinking styles, are 21% more likely to outperform financial market averages. That's not small potatoes.
21%. Okay, that's a strong argument right there. So it's good for business, but what about the impact on society as a whole?
They get into that too. There's this index called the GEGI, the Gender Equality and Governance Index, that analyzes data from 158 countries.
Okay, break that down for us. What does the GGI tell us about leadership and societal well-being?
It's fascinating strong correlation between gender equality and overall societal progress. Countries with more gender equality score higher in things like education, healthcare, economic development. It's not just about fairness, it's about a more thriving world for everyone. And the book, it highlights companies already reaping the rewards of this balanced approach, right?
Right, like Google, known for innovation. I don't imagine they've abandoned decisiveness, but...
They balance it. Huge emphasis on psychological safety and teamwork. It's a culture where people feel safe, taking risks, sharing ideas, challenging things. That's where creativity comes from.
So it's not about going soft, it's about getting the best ideas out there. What about Patagonia, a company I've always admired, profit A&D purpose,
Patagonia, another great example. Woven environmental responsibility into their strategy, showing you can be both profitable and ethical. It's about leading with that long-term vision.
Which seems pretty smart these days. Any other standouts?
Unilever, under Paul Pullman. He demonstrated that a similar approach could be massively successful even in a huge multinational company. sustainable practices, social responsibility without sacrificing profits.
So this shift is happening across multiple sectors. What about tech, which still struggles with that boys' club image?
That's where Satya Nadella at Microsoft gets really interesting. Decisive and strategic, but he's also prioritized empathy and collaboration.
So he's challenging those old stereotypes about tech leadership. It seems like he's proving masculine and feminine qualities, they're not opposites, they work together to create something stronger.
Exactly. And the book even gets into the neuroscience behind it. The idea that men and women's brains are fundamentally different, that's outdated. Far more similarities than differences.
So men are from Mars, women are from Venus, more pop psychology than science.
Precisely. Emotional intelligence, crucial for effective leadership, isn't tied to gender at all. It can be developed regardless of your background.
Now that's a message I can get behind. So anyone can learn to be a more balanced and effective leader. But what does the research say about the impact of women in leadership specifically?
A lot of compelling data there. A study in BMJ Global Health found companies with more women in leadership roles tend to have better financial performance, greater innovation, stronger ethical initiatives.
So there's a clear business case for promoting women, not to mention the broader societal benefits. And this all circles back to emotional intelligence, EQ, as Daniel Goleman calls it. Quick rundown for those not familiar.
Essentially understanding and managing your own emotions, recognizing and influencing the emotions of others. And it's becoming clear EQ is as important as IQ, maybe even more so for leadership.
Especially today with collaboration, empathy, all those complex dynamics.
You got it. And the book highlights how a lack of EQ can lead to disaster. Leaders driven purely by ego, lacking self-awareness, they create toxic cultures, make decisions that harm their organizations.
On the flip side, we have leaders like Jacinda Ardern, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, who showed how EQ-driven leadership builds trust, resilience, community, especially during crisis.
Right. Her style was a masterclass in strength and empathy. Two wings in action. She showed being compassionate isn't weakness. It can be a source of huge strength and resilience.
So it's not just theory. We're seeing how these integrated leadership qualities make a real difference. But how do we go from these examples to putting it into practice?
Well, the book gets into that too. They introduce the concept of adaptive leadership, developed by Ron Heifetz. Being flexible, adjusting your leadership style to the situation.
Adaptive leadership. I like it. Being responsive, reading the room, knowing when to dial up certain qualities, dial down others, not being stuck in one mode.
Right. Recognizing there's no one-size-fits-all. And that naturally leads to integrating masculine and feminine as needed.
So how does the book break down this spectrum of leadership qualities? Sounds complex.
They get practical. They explain that these qualities, masculine and feminine, they actually exist on a continuum. It's not either, it's embracing the full spectrum.
I love that. It's not limiting ourselves to those old gender stereotypes. It's recognizing we all have the potential for a wider range of leadership skills.
That's key. And they emphasize these qualities aren't gender-specific at all. Everyone can cultivate and embody a range of traits.
It's so empowering. How do we figure out where we fall on this spectrum? Assess our strengths and weaknesses.
That's where the book gets super helpful. It provides several self-assessment tools.
Okay, now we're talking. Give us the rundown on these tools. I'm ready to start reflecting.
One that stands out is the Leadership Virtue Inventory. It's a deep dive into your current style, helps you see where a more balanced approach could be beneficial.
So tapping into a wider range of virtues, becoming more well-rounded, I'm all for that. What else?
They also have this fascinating assessment called Human Virtues and Corresponding Flaws, adapted from Luis Enrique Dost's work. It's a framework for evaluating your virtues, those qualities that contribute to your character and effectiveness as a leader.
Intense, but incredibly insightful. What kind of virtues are we talking about?
Everything from joy and altruism to courage, honesty, humility, even radiance.
Radiance. Now that's a leadership quality I don't hear every day.
Right, it's about exuding warmth and positivity.
I love it. Leadership isn't just about the bottom line, it's about those positive human qualities that inspire others. So you go through the assessment, you identify your strengths and weaknesses, then what?
The book really pushes translating insight into action. Choose a few virtues to focus on, then make a conscious effort to practice them.
So taking those abstract concepts and putting them into practice, what about this masculine-feminine leadership trait inventory? Intrigued.
Another helpful one pinpoints your leadership style, specifically how you balance those masculine and feminine qualities. Rate yourself on a scale for each trait. Gives you a visual snapshot, highlights where you might need more balance.
So it helps you see your natural tendencies, then figure out where to stretch and grow.
Exactly. Making those choices to develop a more integrated, adaptable leadership style.
Which is key for navigating today's world. But what about the flip side? What happens when we overemphasize one set of qualities? What are the dangers of imbalance?
The book goes deep into that. Even positive qualities, taken to an extreme, can be detrimental.
Give us an example. What happens when there's too much emphasis on masculine qualities? Decisiveness, competitiveness.
Imagine a leader hyper-focused on results, constantly pushing, no thought to the impact on their team. Toxic work environment, people afraid to speak up, burnout rampant, creativity stifled. The book even mentions an MIT Sloan study companies with that rigid hierarchical leadership. They had higher turnover, lower employee satisfaction.
Ouch. Pushing those masculine qualities too far can backfire. What about the opposite? Overemphasizing empathy and collaboration.
While essential, constantly striving for harmony and consensus can lead to analysis paralysis, so focused on keeping everyone happy that you avoid tough decisions, which ultimately hinders progress.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, that equilibrium where different qualities work together. How do we even begin to find that balance?
That's where the book introduces a really interesting concept, servant leadership, a model that naturally integrates those diverse leadership qualities we've been talking about.
Servant leadership. I've heard the term, but I'll be honest, not sure I fully get it. Sounds a bit paradoxical, putting others first to be a strong leader.
It does, right.
Yeah.
But at its core, servant leadership is about prioritizing the needs and growth of others above your own self-interest, leading through service, empowering others, creating a culture of collaboration and purpose.
So not about being the boss, barking orders, demanding obedience.
Not at all. Leading with humility, recognizing you don't have all the answers, creating space for others to contribute their talents and perspectives. And it takes strength and courage to put others' needs first, especially in tough spots.
So not the soft or weak approach some might think. Takes inner fortitude to be a servant leader.
Exactly. Channeling your strength through service, not using it to dominate or control.
I'm liking this already. What are some key principles of servant leadership?
The book outlines 10, but the most important for our conversation today are listening and empathy.
Those sound straightforward, but how do they translate into effective leadership?
True listening, in the context of servant leadership, is about deeply understanding others' perspectives, creating a space where people feel safe sharing their ideas, concerns, even disagreements. No fear of judgment.
So fostering open and honest dialogue, which can be so rare, especially in workplaces where there's pressure to conform.
Exactly. And then empathy. In servant leadership, it's not just about feeling sorry for someone. It's putting yourself in their shoes, understanding their experiences, and letting that guide your actions.
So connecting on a human level. Sounds like these principles would create a very different workplace, more supportive, collaborative, and ultimately more effective.
It would. And the book explores how servant leadership helps leaders integrate those masculine and feminine qualities, creating a more balanced and effective style.
Okay, I'm on board with this servant leadership idea, but what are some concrete examples of how those masculine and feminine qualities actually work together? I'm ready to get into the nitty-gritty.
One that really struck me, how listening, often seen as a feminine quality, can actually enhance decisiveness, something we associate with masculine energy.
That's interesting. Seems counterintuitive, but I can see it. It's not about being indecisive. It's about gathering information, considering different perspectives, and then making a more informed decision.
Exactly. Like the difference between a general charging into battle without a strategy and one who assesses the terrain, listens to their advisors, then makes a calculated move.
So decisiveness with wisdom. I like that. What about strategic vision? Often associated with those masculine planning and analysis skills. How can those feminine qualities enhance that?
The book argues that a truly powerful vision not only makes sense logically, but it also resonates with people emotionally. That's where empathy comes in. Allows leaders to understand the needs, aspirations, values of those they lead, creating a vision that inspires and motivates.
That makes sense. Like the difference between a company just chasing profits and one driven by a deeper purpose, a mission people actually believe in.
Exactly. And the book also highlights accountability, often associated with a tough, no-nonsense approach. But servant leadership frames it in a way that's both supportive and growth-oriented.
So not about blaming people when they mess up. It's about creating a culture where people feel safe taking risks, learning, and growing.
Right. Holding people accountable in a way that's respectful, constructive, ultimately focused on helping them learn and develop.
creating a culture where mistakes are opportunities for growth, not failures to be punished. I love that. But I'm wondering, how does this play out in the real world? Are there examples in the book of leaders successfully embodying servant leadership?
There are. And they're so inspiring, showcasing servant leadership in action, from fast-growing startups to community groups to schools.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me about some of these examples.
One that stood out, Cristina Junqueira, co-founder and chief growth officer of Nubank, a Brazilian digital banking platform.
Nubank. Refresh my memory. Haven't heard of them.
They've had incredible growth, serving over 114 million clients globally now. And what's fascinating is that Junqueira's leadership is this beautiful blend of servant leadership and integrated leadership, known for her empathy, advocating for diversity, promoting women, but also a sharp businesswoman, not afraid to make those tough calls.
She sounds amazing. So not fitting into that stereotypical tough CEO mold, she's leading with both heart and head.
Exactly. And it's clearly working. A powerful role model, especially for women in Brazil, showing you can be nurturing and ambitious, prioritizing well-being, while also driving success.
Proof you don't have to sacrifice compassion to succeed in business. What other inspiring leaders does the book showcase?
Another that resonated with me, David Harris, a school principal who completely transformed Greenwood Elementary, a struggling school in a tough urban neighborhood.
Transforming a school with those kinds of challenges takes a special kind of leader. What did he do differently?
When Harris took over, Greenwood Elementary was facing low morale, teachers leaving left and right and barely any funding. He knew he couldn't just fix the symptoms. He had to get to the root.
So he brought in the servant leadership toolkit.
He did, focused on building relationships, empowering others, creating a more supportive, inclusive environment. Started by going out and fighting for resources, getting funding for supplies, programs, even building improvements. Understood that you can't expect kids to thrive if their basic needs aren't met.
So he was an advocate, but also a community builder.
Exactly. He knew lasting change needs everyone involved. Engaged parents in the community created a sense of ownership and responsibility for the school's success.
That's powerful. What about discipline? Schools often struggle there, especially in tough environments. Did he take a more punitive approach?
Actually, he moved away from punishment and implemented restorative justice practices, repairing harm, rebuilding relationships, not just punishing.
Addressing the causes of behavior, helping students take responsibility, and finding solutions that work for everyone.
Right. And he didn't forget the teachers. Prioritized their development, mentoring programs, opportunities for collaboration and growth. Understood that supporting teachers creates a better learning environment for the kids.
So, a holistic approach, the needs of the whole school community. What happened?
It was remarkable. Under Harris, student attendance, academic performance, teacher retention, all significantly improved. Fewer discipline problems. The school became a point of pride.
Incredible. Testament to the power of servant leadership to make real change, not just in business, but anywhere people work together towards a goal. What other inspiring examples are in the book?
There's a fascinating case study on Alex Rivera, a non-binary community organizer, leading social justice initiatives for over a decade.
Community organizing is such challenging work. You need passion, resilience, leadership skills. How does Rivera embody servant leadership?
Empowering others, recognizing leadership doesn't have to be top-down. Establish community councils, giving people from all backgrounds the chance to lead. Ensures the movement has a collective voice.
So, distributing leadership, recognizing everyone has something to offer. Powerful model for social change.
It is. And Rivera is incredibly skilled at navigating conflict. Facilitates open dialogues, safe spaces to express grievances, guides the group towards collaborative solutions.
Conflict is inevitable, especially in social justice. It's how we approach it that matters.
Exactly. Turning those conflicts into opportunities for growth and understanding, not letting them be divisive. And they lead with vulnerability, sharing their own struggles with the community.
Vulnerability, so important for leaders. There's this pressure to seem perfect. It makes them more relatable, more human.
It does. Creates a culture where it's okay to not be okay. People feel supported to ask for help and take care of themselves.
Essential for preventing burnout, especially in activism, such emotionally draining work.
Right. And Rivera's a master storyteller, using personal narratives to connect with people emotionally and inspire them to act.
Stories are so powerful. It sounds like Rivera really embodies servant leadership, showing that anyone, regardless of background or identity, can be a force for good. Any other examples that stand out?
The book also looks at Satya Nadella's leadership at Microsoft. A really interesting example because it shows how these principles can work even in a massive global company.
That's a great point. Microsoft is a far cry from a small startup or a community group. How did Nadella bring those principles to such a large and complex company?
When Nadella took over in 2014, Microsoft was seen as, well, bureaucratic, stuck in its ways, out of touch with its customers.
Rope for a transformation, then.
They were. And Nadella knew the company culture needed a total overhaul. He wanted to shift the mindset from know-it-all to learn-it-all, a culture where curiosity, experimentation, learning from mistakes were valued.
So he was fostering a growth mindset, which is essential for innovation, especially in tech.
Exactly. And he wanted to break down those silos between departments, encouraging more collaboration and knowledge sharing.
Creating a more interconnected and responsive organization, how did he implement these changes?
Led by example, he demonstrated humility, empathy, a willingness to learn from others, and a genuine desire to empower his employees.
So he wasn't just giving orders from above, he was walking the walk.
Exactly. And it was huge. Under Nadella, Microsoft started partnering with competitors, adopted open source technologies, and really empowered employees to innovate and take charge.
He was shaking things up, embracing a more collaborative and innovative approach.
He was. And the results speak for themselves. Microsoft's value soared, employees were more engaged, and the company became a leader again.
Inspiring example of how servant leadership can transform even the most traditional companies. But the book doesn't stop there, does it? It goes beyond servant leadership to other models that contribute to balanced leadership.
It does. It's like they're saying, here's the foundation servant leadership, but there are these other tools that can deepen your understanding and help you build a truly holistic approach.
Okay, let's go deeper. Which models do they highlight?
The Losada model, Theory U, and Positive Intelligence. Each one brings unique insights that really complement the Two Wings framework.
Okay, one by one. What's the Losada model all about?
The Losada model, it focuses on the balance of positive and negative interactions within teams. The idea is that teams with more positive to negative feedback are more effective, creative, and resilient. The Losada ratio suggests that for peak performance, teams need at least 3 positive interactions for every negative one.
So it's not about avoiding negativity altogether. Conflict and criticism can be helpful, but it's about making sure those positive interactions outweigh the negative ones.
Exactly. Think about it. When you feel appreciated, supported, respected, you're more engaged, creative, willing to take risks.
It makes sense. What about Theory U? Sounds a bit more abstract.
It is a bit more conceptual. Theory U, developed by Otto Scharmer, is about leading deep transformational change by tapping into collective intelligence. Leaders need to move beyond just reacting to problems and instead cultivate a deep awareness of the present, listen to their intuition, and embrace emerging possibilities.
So being proactive, sensing those shifts and opportunities that are often hidden below the surface.
Right. Creating a shared vision for the future and working together to make it real.
Sounds powerful for navigating today's world. What about positive intelligence? What's that bring?
Positive intelligence, developed by Shirzad Chamine, focuses on strengthening mental fitness and developing a growth mindset, identifying and overcoming those self-sabotaging thoughts that hold us back.
Oh, I know those thoughts, the doubts, the fears, that inner critic.
We all do.
Yeah.
And positive intelligence gives us tools to recognize those voices, challenge them, and shift to a more positive inner dialogue, becoming the CEO of our own minds.
Yeah.
Taking control of our thoughts instead of letting them control us.
That's so important for leaders. If we're battling those negative thoughts, it impacts our confidence and our ability to lead effectively.
Exactly. And the book doesn't just present these models in isolation. It has a helpful table that compares and contrasts them, showing their strengths and how they complement each other.
It's like a leadership buffet. Choose the tools that resonate with you and build your own unique style.
I love that analogy, creating a rich and diverse leadership tapestry.
And speaking of diversity, the book then dives into building inclusive cultures, right?
Yes. And this is where it gets really practical. They argue that creating an inclusive culture is way more than checking boxes or meeting quotas. It's about creating a deep sense of belonging, where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered to contribute.
Beautiful, but also really challenging to actually create. How do we move beyond those surface-level gestures and create a culture where inclusion is in the organization's DNA?
The book outlines a journey that organizations go through, a progression from just tolerating differences to genuinely appreciating them.
Tolerance to appreciation, what's the difference?
Tolerance is accepting differences. Appreciation goes deeper. It's recognizing and celebrating the unique strengths and perspectives that diversity brings.
So from putting up with to actually seeing value in those differences.
Exactly. And they describe 4 stages that organizations usually go through. Okay, give us stage 1.
Stage 1 is exclusion. Diversity is either non-existent or actively discouraged. Think all male leadership teams, biased hiring, a lack of representation across the board.
That's sadly still the reality for many people today. What about stage 2?
Stage 2 is tolerance. Diversity is there, but it's approached from a legalistic or compliance perspective.
So avoiding lawsuits rather than actually embracing diversity.
Exactly. The focus is on superficial stuff like diversity training or quotas. They're not addressing those deeper biases and power imbalances.
Just checking boxes, not creating real change.
Right. And it leads to resentment and frustration, both from those being excluded and from those who feel forced to comply.
A lose-lose situation. Okay, what about stage 3? What does real inclusion look like?
Stage 3, things get exciting. Organizations actively embrace diversity and make a real effort to create a culture where everyone feels valued and respected.
Okay, give us some specific examples of what this looks like in action. It's things like leadership development programs that focus on inclusivity, mentoring programs for underrepresented groups, and actively seeking out diverse perspectives in decisions. Using data to track progress on diversity goals, and making sure all communication really reflects the organization's diversity.
So it's about making diversity and inclusion part of everything the organization does, not just a side project.
Exactly. And it needs commitment from leadership. They have to challenge the status quo, address those systemic biases, and create a more equitable and just workplace.
Which can be daunting, especially for organizations with a history of exclusion and inequality.
It can be. But the book makes a strong case for why this is absolutely essential for organizations to thrive in the world today.
Because diversity of thought leads to better problem solving, more creativity, and a better understanding of diverse customers.
Exactly. And finally, we reach the pinnacle, stage 4, appreciation.
Appreciation. I love it. Tell us more about this ideal state.
Appreciation goes beyond just accepting and tolerating. It's creating a culture where diversity is truly valued and celebrated, recognizing the unique strengths each person brings, and creating an environment where everyone feels safe being their true selves.
It's not just leveling the playing field. It's making a culture where everyone can thrive, where differences are strengths, not weaknesses.
Exactly. And the book has some really inspiring examples of organizations that have achieved this level of appreciation, and it's transformed their culture, their innovation, and their bottom line.
It sounds beautiful, but it also sounds like it takes a lot of work from everyone.
It does. Building an inclusive culture isn't a one-time project, it's a continuous journey. But the book provides a roadmap with practical strategies and tools for moving from exclusion to appreciation.
And one of those tools is the concept of intersectionality, right?
Yes. Intersectionality is crucial for understanding how complex diversity and inclusion really are. It's a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. It recognizes that people have multiple intersecting identities, gender, race, class, sexual orientation, disability, and so on, and that these identities combine to create unique experiences of privilege and marginalization.
So it's about understanding that people's experiences are shaped by the complex interplay of all these different parts of who they are. We can't just lump people into simple categories.
Exactly. It means recognizing that, say, a woman of color will experience the workplace differently from a white man, and that we need to acknowledge and address those differences.
So intersectionality helps us move beyond those overly simplistic views of diversity and recognize the nuances of people's lived experiences.
Right. It's essential for creating truly inclusive policies and practices that consider everyone's needs, not just those who fit neatly into predefined categories.
It's about making a culture where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued for who they really are. But how do we actually get there? How do we deal with unconscious bias, which can keep inequality going even when we have good intentions?
That's a big question. The book stresses that addressing unconscious bias isn't about blaming people. It's about understanding that these biases are deeply ingrained in our culture, and we all have them, whether we realize it or not.
So it's about being curious, open-minded, willing to learn, admitting we all have blind spots, and then actively working to overcome those biases.
Exactly. And it's about creating systems that help reduce the impact of bias.
Like what? Give us some examples.
They suggest things like using anonymous applications for hiring, having diverse hiring panels, setting up mentoring programs that pair people from different backgrounds, and even thinking about how meetings are run to make sure everyone has a chance to speak.
So a multifaceted approach, addressing bias on both a personal and an organizational level.
Right. It's also about creating a culture where people feel comfortable pointing out bias when they see it.
Which can be tricky, especially when those biases are subtle or unconscious. but it's essential for making real change. Any tips for handling those conversations?
Approach those conversations with curiosity and empathy, not judgment or blame. Focus on learning and growing, helping people to understand the impact of their words and actions, even if they didn't mean any harm.
So creating a safe space for honest dialogue where people can learn and grow.
Exactly. And they also highlight the importance of developing new capacities, expanding our leadership skills to become more inclusive and effective.
Okay, tell us more about these new capacities. What do we need to work on?
Empathy building is crucial. Moving beyond just intellectually understanding people's perspectives to really feeling with them, connecting with their experiences on a deeper level.
That's powerful, but it can also be tough, especially for leaders used to being analytical or strategic. How can we cultivate empathy authentically and sustainably?
The book offers some practical suggestions. Practice active listening, engage in perspective-taking exercises, and look for opportunities to connect with people from different backgrounds and with different experiences.
It's about getting out of our comfort zones, challenging our assumptions, opening ourselves up to new ways of seeing things.
Exactly. And it's not a one-time thing. Developing empathy is an ongoing practice.
And along with empathy, the book stresses those collaboration and communication skills.
Yes. Today, being able to communicate well, build strong relationships, and work together with diverse teams, those are essential leadership skills.
It's not enough to be brilliant on your own. You need to be able to share those ideas, inspire others, and work together.
Exactly. The book has some great advice for improving these skills, things like practicing clear and concise communication, being aware of our body language, getting feedback from others, and accepting constructive criticism.
It's about becoming more self-aware, understanding how our words and actions impact others.
Right. And along with communication, the book highlights emotional intelligence.
We talked about EQ earlier, but how does it specifically connect to balanced leadership?
They argue that emotional intelligence is the foundation of integrated leadership. It helps us understand and manage our own emotions, recognize and respond to others' emotions with sensitivity, and build strong, trusting relationships.
It's about bringing self-awareness and emotional maturity to every interaction and decision.
Exactly. And the good news is that emotional intelligence can be developed. The book has some practical exercises for improving our EQ, things like practicing mindfulness, reflecting on our emotional triggers, and getting feedback from people we trust.
So making that conscious effort to understand our own emotions and the emotional landscape of those around us.
Right. And then there's flexibility and adaptability. In today's fast-changing world, being able to adapt to new situations, embrace change, think on our feet, those are crucial leadership skills.
It's about letting go of that need to control everything and being more fluid and responsive.
Exactly. And the book suggests ways to become more flexible, like practicing mindfulness to become more present and less reactive, trying new things that push us out of our comfort zones, and developing a growth mindset that sees challenges as learning opportunities.
So becoming more comfortable with ambiguity, more willing to embrace the unknown, and more confident in our ability to navigate challenges.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what's so exciting is that the book doesn't just offer these abstract concepts. It gives us lots of practical tools and exercises to actually develop these capacities.
It's a toolbox for transformation. Speaking of transformation, I'm curious about what the book says about making these changes in organizations. It seems like we need more than just individuals embracing these ideas. We need systemic change to create workplaces that are truly balanced and inclusive.
You're absolutely right. The book really gets into the organizational side of balanced leadership, and they stress that it's not about just tweaking a few policies or having a diversity training now and then. It's about a fundamental change in how people think and how the culture works. This transformation has to touch every part of the organization.
So how do we even start something so big?
They suggest starting with a realistic assessment of how leadership works in the organization right now. Figure out what's working, what's not, and where the organization needs to grow in terms of balanced leadership and inclusivity.
So, like conducting a leadership audit, asking people at all levels to share their perspectives and get a complete picture.
Exactly. And it needs to be more than just surveys. Create a space for real, honest conversations. Invite people to share what they really think and listen carefully to what they say.
Creating a culture of transparency and trust where people feel safe to speak their minds.
Right. Once you have a clear picture of how things are, you can start to develop a plan for change. This plan needs to fit the specific needs of the organization. But the book points out some key areas to work on developing leadership skills, improving how teams work together, changing organizational structures, and updating performance management systems.
Let's break those down, starting with leadership development. What can organizations do to help their leaders adopt this more balanced approach?
They suggest training on things like servant leadership, unconscious bias, and creating an environment where people feel safe to speak up. It's about giving leaders the knowledge, skills, and awareness they need to build work environments that are more inclusive and effective.
And it's not just about one-time workshops. It's about creating a culture where people are constantly learning and growing with ongoing opportunities for mentoring, coaching, and reflection.
Exactly. Leadership development should be a core part of the organization's culture, not an afterthought.
And along with individual development, the book talks about changing those parts of an organization that can keep inequality going, right? Things like how the organization is structured and how performance is managed.
Absolutely. They challenge those traditional hierarchies that concentrate power at the top and reinforce those old command and control ways of leading. They suggest looking at more decentralized structures where people at all levels have the authority to make decisions.
So, giving people at all levels the power to take ownership and share their ideas, moving away from "I'm the boss, I know everything," to a more collaborative way of working.
Exactly. And when it comes to performance management, they recommend getting rid of those ranking systems that make people compete with each other. Instead, focus on setting goals as a team and rewarding the team's success, recognizing that we do better when we work together towards a common goal.
Shifting the culture from competition to collaboration, understanding that when one person succeeds, it helps everyone.
I love that. And it's about making sure that performance reviews include feedback from all sides, not just from the boss. This gives a more complete picture of how people contribute and make a difference.
So recognizing that leadership isn't just about what you achieve on your own, it's about how you interact with others, how you help the team as a whole.
Exactly. And this all comes back to those servant leadership ideas we talked about before listening: empathy, healing, awareness, and building community.
It's about making those values part of the organization's DNA, creating a culture where people feel valued, respected, and free to be themselves.
I agree. It's inspiring. But is there anything else the book offers to help us on this journey? Any tools or frameworks that organizations can use to see how they're doing and where they can improve?
There is. The book has this helpful tool called the Organizational Balance Assessment. It helps organizations figure out where they stand with those balanced leadership principles. It's a great way to find the areas where the organization is doing well and the areas where it needs to grow.
That sounds useful. Like having a checkup to identify those blind spots and come up with a plan for getting better. What kinds of things does this assessment look at?
It covers a lot, from how many women and minorities are in leadership positions to how committed the organization is to work-life balance and employee well-being. It also looks at communication styles, how decisions are made, and how the organization deals with conflict.
So it's pretty thorough. What happens after an organization completes the assessment?
The book provides a framework for understanding the results and then coming up with a plan for growth that's tailored to that specific organization. It helps organizations identify concrete steps they can take to strengthen their commitment to balanced leadership, like putting new policies and programs in place, changing how they communicate, and creating decision-making processes that are more inclusive.
It sounds like a really practical and useful guide for organizations that are serious about embracing these principles. I'm also curious about how the book deals with those trickier challenges that often pop up when organizations try to implement these changes. Things like resistance to change, unconscious bias, and the difficulty of changing cultural norms that are deeply ingrained.
They don't shy away from those challenges. They emphasize that transformation is a process, not a quick fix, and it takes constant effort, patience, and a willingness to learn and adapt along the way. They offer strategies for dealing with resistance, addressing unconscious bias, and creating a culture where open communication and continuous learning are valued.
It's important to have those tools and strategies because change can be messy and uncomfortable, especially when you're challenging long-held beliefs and power structures. But the book makes a convincing argument for why this is a journey worth taking.
Absolutely. They argue that embracing balanced leadership isn't just the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. It results in more engaged employees, more creative solutions, and ultimately more successful organizations.
And it creates a world that's more just, equitable, and fulfilling for everyone.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive. We've covered so much. The need for balanced leadership, the power of servant leadership, the importance of building inclusive cultures, the challenge of unconscious bias, and the practical things we can do to create lasting change in ourselves, our teams, and our organizations.
It's been a really rich and inspiring conversation. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools and perspectives to use in my own journey as a leader.
Me too. And I hope our listener feels the same way. This book, Two Wings, Balancing Feminine and Masculine Power in Life and Organizations, is full of knowledge, insights, and practical guidance for anyone who wants to grow as a person and as a professional and make a positive impact on the world.
It's a must-read for anyone who wants to lead with both wings.
And on that note, I want to leave our listener with a final question to think about. What's one small step you can take today to bring more balance to your leadership style and make things more inclusive and fulfilling for yourself and the people you lead?
That's a great question. It's important to remember that even small changes can have a big impact, creating positive change that reaches far beyond ourselves.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep leading with both wings.
It really is like tending a garden, you know? You've got to nurture those relationships, deal with the conflicts, and then celebrate the successes and all the growth.
That's such a great analogy. And speaking of growth, the book really pushes leaders to keep developing themselves, right? It's not just about reading the stuff, it's about actually gaining new skills and changing how we approach the world.
Oh, absolutely. They highlight a few areas where leaders can really benefit from focusing on their growth. Empathy, that's a big one. It's not just about understanding where people are coming from. It's about really feeling with them, connecting with their experiences on a much deeper level.
That's so powerful. But I can imagine it's tough, especially for leaders who are more used to thinking analytically or strategically. So how do we actually get better at empathy in a way that feels real and like something we can keep up?
The book gives some really solid suggestions. Things like practicing active listening, doing those perspective-taking exercises, even just looking for chances to connect with people who come from different backgrounds and have different experiences than our own.
It's about getting out of our comfort zones, questioning what we think we know, and being open to seeing things in new ways.
Right. And it's not like you do it once and you're done. Developing empathy, it's a constant thing, something you work on throughout your life.
And along with empathy, the book also talks about improving those collaboration and communication skills, right?
Yes. These days, if you want to be a successful leader, you have to be able to communicate clearly, build solid relationships, and work well with all kinds of people.
It's not enough to just be smart on your own. You've got to be able to share those ideas, get other people excited, and work together towards a goal.
You got it. And the book has some great tips for getting better at those things. Practice communicating in a way that's clear and to the point. Pay attention to your body language. Ask others for feedback, and be open to hearing what they have to say, even if it's not always positive.
It's about becoming more aware of ourselves and how we come across to other people.
Exactly. And along with communication, they talk about emotional intelligence, too.
We talked about EQ before, but I'd love to hear more about how it fits with this balanced leadership idea.
They say that emotional intelligence is at the heart of integrated leadership. It's what lets us understand and manage our own emotions, recognize and respond to other people's emotions with sensitivity, and build those strong, trusting relationships.
It's about bringing that self-awareness and emotional maturity to every interaction and decision.
Exactly. And the good news is that emotional intelligence isn't set in stone. We can learn and grow in that area over time. The book has some exercises for building those EQ muscles. Things like practicing mindfulness, thinking about what triggers our emotions, and asking people we trust for feedback on how we handle our emotions.
So being more mindful of our own emotions and how the people around us are feeling.
Right. And then there's flexibility and being able to adapt. In this world where everything's changing so fast, leaders have to be able to adjust to new situations, embrace change, and think on their feet.
It's about letting go of that need to be in control all the time and learning to be more responsive and go with the flow.
Exactly. And the book suggests some ways to cultivate that flexibility. Things like practicing mindfulness so you can be more present and less reactive, trying new things that push you out of your comfort zone, and having a growth mindset where you look at challenges as chances to learn and improve.
So becoming more comfortable with not knowing everything, more open to new experiences, and more confident that we can handle whatever comes our way.
I agree. And what I find really exciting is that the book isn't just about these big ideas. It gives us a lot of practical tools and exercises we can use to actually get better at these things.
It's like they're giving us a manual for becoming better leaders and better people. Speaking of that, what does the book say about making these kinds of changes in entire organizations? It seems like we need more than just a few leaders getting on board with these ideas. We need real system-wide changes to create workplaces that are truly balanced and inclusive.
You're spot on. The book talks about the challenges of bringing balanced leadership to organizations, and they make it clear that it's not just about changing a few rules or having a diversity training session every now and then. It's about a much bigger shift in how people think and how things are done in the organization. This change needs to reach every corner of the company.
So where do we even begin with something that big?
They suggest starting with an honest look at how leadership works in the organization right now. What's working well? What's not? Where are the gaps when it comes to balanced leadership and inclusivity?
So it's like giving the organization's leadership a checkup, getting feedback from people at every level to understand the whole picture.
Exactly. And it can't just be surface-level feedback. Leaders need to create safe spaces where people can be honest, invite them to share their perspectives, and really listen to what they have to say.
It's about building a culture of openness and trust where people feel like they can speak their minds without being punished.
Right. And once you have a good understanding of how things are, you can start creating a plan for change. This plan needs to be tailored to the specific organization, but the book outlines some key areas to focus on: developing leadership skills, making teams work better together, changing organizational structures, and updating how performance is managed.
Let's unpack those one by one. Let's start with leadership development. What are some practical steps that organizations can take to help their leaders become more balanced?
They suggest training on topics like servant leadership, unconscious bias, and how to make people feel comfortable speaking up. It's about giving leaders the knowledge and tools they need to create a more inclusive and effective work environment.
And it's not just about one-time workshops, right? It's about making learning and growth a continuous part of the culture, offering ongoing opportunities for mentoring, coaching, and self-reflection.
Exactly. Developing leadership skills should be woven into the organization's fabric, not just an afterthought.
Besides developing individuals, the book also stresses addressing the systemic things that can keep inequality going within organizations, right? Things like how the organization is structured and how performance is evaluated.
Definitely. They challenge those traditional hierarchies where all the power sits at the top. Those structures tend to reinforce those old command and control leadership styles. They suggest exploring flatter structures, where the ability to make decisions is spread throughout the organization.
So giving people at all levels more ownership and a chance to contribute their ideas. Moving away from that top-down, I'm in charge mentality and toward a more collaborative and agile approach.
That's it. And when it comes to performance management, they suggest getting rid of systems that rank employees and make them compete with each other. Instead, focus on setting goals as a team and rewarding the team's accomplishments, recognizing that we achieve more when we're all pulling in the same direction.
It's a shift from competition to collaboration, understanding that everyone benefits when the team succeeds.
Exactly. It's also about making sure that performance reviews include feedback from multiple sources, peers, direct reports, and supervisors. This gives them a more well-rounded view of a person's contributions.
So recognizing that leadership isn't just about individual achievement. It's about how we work with and support others, how we help everyone succeed.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And this all connects back to those servant leadership principles we talked about before: listening, empathy, healing, awareness, and building community.
It's about weaving those values into the very core of the organization, creating a culture where people feel valued, respected, and able to bring their whole selves to work.
That's the goal. It's a really powerful vision, but it also makes me think, what about all the day-to-day stuff? How do we actually live out these values in our everyday interactions?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the book reminds us that while those big systemic changes are important, it's equally important to focus on those small everyday moments where we can choose to lead with balance, empathy, and inclusivity.
So it's not just about grand gestures. It's about making those conscious choices in those little interactions throughout our day.
Exactly. Like, how are we showing up in meetings? Are we really listening to others' perspectives? Are we creating space for diverse voices to be heard? Are we recognizing and appreciating the contributions of others?
Those little things add up. They create the foundation for a more balanced and inclusive culture.
And the book also stresses the importance of self-care. It's hard to lead effectively if we're burned out, stressed out, and running on empty.
So true. It's like that oxygen mask on an airplane analogy. You have to take care of yourself before you can effectively take care of others.
Right. And that means prioritizing things like sleep, healthy eating, exercise, spending time in nature, connecting with loved ones, whatever helps you to feel grounded, energized, and resilient.
Because when we're feeling our best, we're able to bring our best to our leadership roles. We're more patient, more compassionate, more creative, and more able to navigate those inevitable challenges that come with leadership.
Well, this has been such an enriching deep dive. We've explored the need for balanced leadership, the principles of servant leadership, the steps to building a more inclusive culture, and the importance of developing those key leadership capacities. It's a lot to take in, but it's also incredibly inspiring.
It is. It's a reminder that leadership is a journey, not a destination. It's about continually learning, growing, and challenging ourselves to become the best leaders we can be.
And it's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more balanced, just, and compassionate world. So as we wrap up, I want to leave our listener with a final thought. How can you use these insights to make a positive impact in your own sphere of influence, whether it's at work, in your community, or in your personal life? What seeds of change can you plant today?
Beautiful. Thanks for guiding us through this deep dive. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And thanks to our listeners for joining us. Until next time, keep striving for balance, keep leading with heart, and keep making a difference in the world.